All right, welcome to chapter 3. This is the third chapter in our book, which is about biochemistry. This is a very short chapter. It's only 2 sections long, so you can expect this chapter to last a little bit shorter than the last 2 chapters that we did, since it's only 2 sections, so there's not as much to cover here. We're just going to talk about two things. We're going to talk about carbon compounds and why carbon is so important, and then we're going to also talk about the molecules of life. When you finish this section, you should be able to describe proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, and nucleic acids, so DNA/RNA. You should be able to talk about which foods are contained in them. You should be able to draw the organic molecules and talk about how they function in the body, so what they do to help in the body. A lot of this stuff happens in 3.2, so we're not going to get to carbs, lipids, proteins, etc. until next section. But these are things that you should be able to do and that you should be able to learn in chapter 3. So let's talk about organic compounds, okay? Well, first we should talk about what they mean, so we should start here. So organic compounds are compounds that are primarily made from carbon atoms. Remember that a compound is something that has two or more elements that always combined in a specific way. So organic compounds are found in things that are once living or are living now currently. They're primarily made from carbon. Fossil fuels, for example, are organic compounds because even though they're no longer living, they're made from things that were once living, like decayed trees or algae or swamp plants are all good examples. The reason that carbon is such an important element and carbon is necessary for life is because carbon has this unique property about it where it has 4 electrons. So in order to make that ideal form of having 8 electrons, it can bond to itself. Since it has 4 electrons, it can bond to something else that has 4 other electrons. So carbon is able to bond and build upon itself and make tons of different carbonations. And because of that, it forms the skeleton of most molecules in living things. Some terms that go along in this section, okay? Monomer, that's a carbon molecule made of 1 unit. Mono means 1. Polymer, that's a carbon molecule made of more than 1 unit. So if you have multiple units in a molecule made of carbon, it's a polymer. And if you have a very, very large polymer, so multiple units and a ton of them, we call it a macromolecule. Macro refers to large. Some words that you need to learn. If you don't already know these, you need to know them. These are very important words in science and you should know what they refer to. We talk about these not just in biology, but a lot of other science classes as well. Mono refers to 1. Poly means many. Hydro means water. Lysis means to break apart or to split. Tri means 3. And di means 2. Okay, so 1, 2, many, 3, etc. Some other terms, macro, as I referenced on the previous slide, means large. If it's micro, it means small. Just like di, bi also means 2. So you could use di or bi to refer to 2. These are terms that if you don't already know them, you'll use them enough in science to pick up on them and be able to familiarize yourself with them. So if you're looking at these questions, go ahead and maybe pause this video, look at these questions, look at the notes that I just went over, see if you can answer them. So just see if you're able to answer these 6 questions by looking at them, or maybe look on the notes on your own and see if you can answer those really quick. When you're done, resume the video and watch the rest. So, organic molecules or organic compounds are molecules that have the backbone of carbon involved in them. And as far as drawing them goes, the way that we draw organic molecules is we use lines to represent hydrogen bonds between the organic molecules to link them together, and we use C's to represent carbon. Sometimes there's 2 lines, that refers to 2 electrons, so it's talking about a double bond. Sometimes there's even 3 lines, and this will refer to a triple bond. So if we're to draw some organic molecules, it might look like this. You could see down here, there's 2 lines, it's a double bond, here's a triple bond, okay. Sometimes they'll have the C's written in here, as you could see. Sometimes it's like this, where it doesn't have the C's written. Wherever the 2 lines meet, that represents a C or a carbon, okay? This is how they draw organic molecules. If you ever study chemistry in college, you'll study organic chemistry at some point if you're a science major in college, and you'll be seeing a lot of these organic molecules in your sleep. So, organic compounds are groups of atoms and chains, and we call these groups functional groups. And there's a few specific functional groups that we talk about in this section. The atoms that are in the chain determine how the chain attaches to others or their function, which is why they're called functional groups. And functional groups, the whole purpose of them is that they control chemical reactions in cells because they can only bond and attach in certain ways. So they have control over those reactions. These are the main functional groups that you should be familiar with. There's 5 of them. You should be able to identify them. So on a test, if I show you one of these groups, you should be able to tell me which one it is. So this is what the hydroxyl group looks like. We talked about this when we talked about acids and bases. So if you have a lot of hydroxyl groups, a substance would be basic. Remember we talked about, so OH, carbonyl, CO, like this. Carboxyl, it's basically kind of a combination of the two of these if you look. So you have the CO, just like here, and then you also have the OH attached, so carbonyl hydroxyl, carboxyl, if you think of it that way. So if you know these, you just know that this is a combination of the two of these. Amino groups, so NH2, so 2 H's, and then phosphate group. This one's really easy to identify out of these 4 because this is the only one that has a P or a phosphate. Some other things to learn about in this chapter, we talk about condensation reactions and hydrolysis. We'll talk about condensation reactions first. A condensation reaction is when water is created and leaves the reaction. So if water is created, we're talking about water being a product of the reaction. So it would be on this side of the arrow or the product side, not the reactant, since it's created. So you have ADP plus a phosphate to make ATP. This is diphosphate, 2 phosphates. You add another phosphate, it becomes triphosphate or 3 phosphates. And then you're also creating water. Therefore, this is a condensation reaction. Water is created or water is a product. Hydrolysis, if you remember those terms we talked about that I said that you should know, hydro means water, lysis means to break apart or to split. So the splitting of water, right? So you are splitting water into separate compounds or molecules. So in this reaction, water is split and 2 molecules are formed from the original. So you have ATP, adenosine triphosphate. You're trying to remove a phosphate from it so that it becomes adenosine diphosphate plus a phosphate on its own. And you're using water as a reactant this time instead of a product. So hydrolysis, water is split. So water is a reactant in this case instead of a product. And it's on this side of the arrow. Some things to review. Monomer of carbon looks like this, 1 carbon, right? Polymer of carbon, multiple units of carbon. Macromolecule, right? Very large molecule. Macro means large, so all these carbons. Remember that the lines represent hydrogen bonds. Some of the functional groups I mentioned and what those look like. Remember hydroxyl, OH. It could look like this in any of these forms. Carbonyl, right? C, the double bond in the O. It can look like this in any of the forms that it can be drawn in. Amino, that's the one with the N and the 2 H's. These are the different ways it can be drawn. Phosphate, it's only drawn this way. It's the one that has the P in the middle, so it's easy to remember. And then if you put carbonyl and hydroxyl together, you get carboxyl, which has the OH group, right, as well as the C double bond O. Okay, so to review, hydroxyl, carbonyl, carboxyl, phosphate, amino. You should be able to identify what those look like. You should be able to know these 5 functional groups by sight. Okay? If you want to really test yourself, then try to draw them from memory. Then they'll be easy to identify because you can even draw them, not just identify them. That's it for 3.1. Okay, we'll talk about molecules of life in 3.2 next time.